So every year we hear the same thing. Australia is committed to climate action. But after decades of talk, where do we actually stand? As part of the Paris Agreement, Australia has promised to cut our emissions by 43% by 2030 and to achieve net zero by 2050. Sounds good, right? But here's the reality. Australia's only been able to reduce our emissions by around 28% compared to our 2005 levels. And most of that drop is not actually from phasing out fossil fuels. It comes from changes in our land use and carbon accounting. In fact, fossil fuels and industrial emissions have barely moved at all, only down 1.4%. We're not really solving the problem. We're just moving numbers around. The government says that we're serious about reducing emissions. But at the same time, Australia is one of the biggest fossil fuel exporters in the entire world. Australia emits just over 400 million tonnes of CO2 per year. But the emissions from the fossil fuels that we export add up to over 1 billion tonnes per year of CO2. That's over twice the emissions that we emit back home. We claim to be lowering our emissions while still fueling the world's carbon addiction. And here's the real kicker. The Australian government puts over $14 billion a year into fossil fuel subsidies, while renewables only get about $3 billion. We're actually finding the problem instead of the solution. And this is happening while Australia has access to some of the greatest solar and wind resources across the entire Earth. Instead of locking ourselves into fossil fuel exports, we could be moving towards exporting clean, renewable energy to the rest of the world through the use of hydrogen, synthetic fuels, biomass, and leading in battery storage. We could be leading the world in the energy transition instead of holding it back. And we're already paying the price for climate change. Just look at Black Summer, one of the most expensive bushfires we've ever experienced. 24 million hectares burnt, over 3 billion animals killed or displaced, and over $100 billion in economic damage. And by 2050, climate disasters could be costing Australians up to $40 billion per year. So how is Australia actually doing with the energy transition? If I had to rate our progress out of 10, I'd probably give us a 2. Our grid is about 1/3 renewable electricity, and we get some points for that. The vast majority of our renewable energy capacity is just covering new demand and hasn't really touched our existing emissions. Most of our reported progress comes from changes in our carbon accounting, not actually from reducing fossil fuel emissions. Our targets were weak to begin with, and we're not likely to hit them anyway. Meanwhile, fossil fuel companies such as Santos, Woodside, and Chevron are putting millions of dollars into political donations to Australian political parties, while their coal and gas projects keep getting approved, and they keep receiving billions of dollars in subsidies. We're not just stuck in the same cycle. It's been paid for. No wonder we're not making enough progress. Australia needs to step up by stopping new fossil fuel projects and redirecting the $14 billion in fossil fuel subsidies towards building out our renewable energy potential to future-proof our Australian economy, to move away from digging resources out of the ground and exporting it overseas, because that's unsustainable and unstrategic in the long term. And also because we can't afford to let the climate spiral out of control. That's why I'm fighting for a seat for humanity within Australia's parliament. A seat which will represent what's best for the entire planet and the entire human race from inside our national decision making. Because the future of our entire planet